Good morning, I'm Harley Schlanger from the LaRouche Organization with your daily update for June 25th, 2021. Ordinarily on Friday I take your questions, but given some of the recent developments, I think it's more important that I update you on a few of these things and encourage you to participate in the Schiller Institute online conference this weekend, where these will be addressed in much greater detail than I can do in this short update. But there are developments which are absolutely at the heart of whether mankind has the moral fitness to survive. We saw a potential breakthrough of at least giving some breathing space with the summit that just took place in Geneva between Presidents Biden and Putin, with the most important development there being, besides the fact that they talked, that they made a firm statement reaffirming what had been said back in 1985 between Presidents Reagan and Gorbachev, that nuclear war cannot be won and must never be fought. Now, just within days after this, we're having a whole proliferation of new crises, new threats, new discussion of nuclear war, most of which are coming directly from the British Empire. So I want to go back through this to give you a sense, to make it absolutely clear to you that the strategic fulcrum is in the hands of the British Empire, and that power must be taken away from them. And by British Empire, we're talking about the City of London, we're talking about the British intelligence community, and its alliance with Wall Street, with Silicon Valley, and with what's called the military-industrial complex in the United States. Now, the most obvious British reaction to the Biden-Putin summit was the confrontation 2 days ago in the Black Sea. Now, this was a story which the British are trying to say on the one hand that it didn't happen, that what occurred is that the HMS Defender, a British naval warship, came within the international limits of Crimea, which is territorial waters claimed by Russia, and that the Russians sent out patrol boats, they sent out radio warnings, they fired shots across the bow, had overflights of planes, and threatened to bomb the ship if it didn't leave. Now, initially, the British said this didn't happen. It was made up by the Russians to try to give Putin a sense to the population of Russia that Putin's standing up for Russian interests. Unfortunately for that line, there was a BBC reporter on board who confirmed that, in fact, there were radio warnings, there were shots fired, that this would be a deliberate move to make a point to Russia, is what the BBC reporter said. And then Boris Johnson's spokesman said that the British do not accept Russia's claims to Crimea. In other words, the British were doing a deliberate test. For what reason? Well, I think it's to send a message that they're not going to accept the pullback from the flight forward of NATO and the British-American policy against Russia and China, that they intend to continue this kind of confrontational posture, which is typical of the British Empire, in the face of a possibility of pulling back from that. At the same time, there's a report that came out from the RAND Corporation that said that NATO might lose a nuclear war to Russia because of the upgrading of such things as the hypersonic missiles, as well as Russia's approach, given that they now have no forward position, which they once had with the Warsaw Pact. Now everything has to be done from Russia's homeland, and therefore they have a certain advantage to that, but also it means a threat that if it went to nuclear war, would NATO and primarily the US respond to Russian attacks with nuclear weapons? Now, interestingly, yesterday Macron and Merkel, even while saying there should be more sanctions to deter bad behavior by Russia, said that Europe should be engaged in a dialogue with Putin. And this was met with howls of scorn and disappointment and rage from some EU circles, especially from Eastern Europe. And at the same time, there's a push going on for a military buildup. Now, this corresponds to indications of a complete breakdown of the Western economy, the move into hyperinflation with no strategy to combat it. What are they going to do? Raise interest rates and then shut down whatever economic activity has started up again after the lockdowns? The Green New Deal, the so-called infrastructure bill in the United States, which has very little to do with infrastructure. So we're seeing at the same time a complete collapse of infrastructure. For 5 days last week, there were power outages prolonged in Milan, Italy, which is an industrial center in the north of the country. You had another bridge collapse in the Mainz-Frankfurt area in Germany. The last time a bridge collapsed near Wiesbaden, the Schiersteiner Brücke, it took years to repair it. There are at least dozens of other bridges in disrepair in Germany that are in danger. The United States has hundreds of bridges which are structurally unsound. There was a collapse of a condo in Miami, Florida, which they're still trying to figure out how many people were killed. And at the same time, you have huge stress on the power grids in California and Texas. So there's a complete breakdown of infrastructure. Why? Because in neoliberal economics, you don't invest in infrastructure. Infrastructure is a losing proposition. Only if it pays for itself, the so-called pay-as-you-go, which means what? Toll roads, toll bridges? How does that function? It doesn't. The American system model of a national investment bank that puts credit forward for real production is the only solution for this. But that's not on the books. And so the Republican-Democratic deal that was made, which Biden is claiming is a reassertion of bipartisanship, it's a fraud. It has nothing to do with infrastructure, especially to the extent that it has to do with the Green New Deal. And more importantly, the real bipartisanship in the Congress is for war, the control of the war party, the military-industrial complex on both political parties. So under these circumstances, with serious dangers that affect your lives, let me just mention one other one, the takeover of housing by private speculators like BlackRock and Vanguard, taking over single-family homes, paying prices that people can't afford, so they're driving the prices up, buying the properties, and then they're going to charge huge rents for single-family rentals, and people will have no choice but to pay for that and no longer have any property, no longer have an investment to fall back on. So we're seeing a shift as this paradigm, the imperial paradigm, is grinding to a halt. Nevertheless, the people running it are going to take care of themselves at the expense of the population. That's why we're having a conference this weekend. This is a continuation of a series of events, of conferences, where people from around the world are coming together to discuss solutions. Solutions which have been developed over the years by the LaRouche movement, especially by Lyndon LaRouche and his breakthrough work on economics and strategic policy. So go to theschillerinstitute.com, register for the conference Saturday and Sunday, the 26th and 27th of June, starting at 9 a.m. Eastern Time. That's tomorrow. Any one of you can sign up. It's free. If you register, you can participate in the discussion. You'll have a link that will allow you to ask questions. This is most important because a republic only functions to the extent that its citizens are involved in policy, and not policy out of anger or rage, but thoughtful deliberation, where you're aware of what the issues are, you're aware of what's causing these crises, who's behind it, who's benefiting from it, what are they doing to disturb you or to disorient you or divert you from addressing the real issue. And that's what we'll be discussing. So join us this weekend. I think you'll find the discussion exhilarating, maybe at times frightening, but it's necessary that we face reality if we're going to change it. So thanks for joining me. Join me tomorrow. I'll be moderating the panel, the economics panel, Sunday morning. and co-moderating the strategic panel Saturday morning. So I'll see you then.